Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford had seen many curious things in their long and occasionally ridiculous history of adventure, but Tuppence insisted that nothing delighted her spirit quite like a small Kensington auction. It was, she claimed, the perfect hunting ground for forgotten treasures, unsent love letters, and the sorts of objects that whispered mischief to those with a keen ear. Tommy often muttered that such whispers unfailingly turned into trouble, but he accompanied her nonetheless, partly out of affection and partly because he did not trust her unattended in a room full of potential enigmas. The auction room that afternoon was modest, a cramped hall smelling faintly of polish and old furniture, lined with mismatched chairs and populated by a scattering of devoted bargain seekers. The air hummed with soft murmurs and the occasional scrape of a chair leg. At the front, the auctioneer, a thin fellow with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, tapped his gavel with restrained enthusiasm. Tuppence had promised not to buy anything of notable size, value, or hazard. "Strictly browsing," she had said, with the sort of solemnity usually reserved for signing treaties. Yet the moment Lot 47 was brought forward, a battered leather writing case from the 1930s, its edges worn soft with age, Tommy saw that treaty crumble. Her eyes brightened. She leaned forward, her hand twitched. Tommy braced himself. "5 shillings, Tuppence called out before the auctioneer finished introducing it. "6, said an elderly man in the second row. "7, Tuppence countered at once, and with such determination that Tommy hid a smile behind his hand. No one dared outbid her after that. The gavel fell, the case was declared hers, and Tommy resigned himself to whatever curious fate the universe had now placed on their doorstep. But fate appeared more punctual than expected. Barely had they turned to leave when a woman in a navy cloche hat approached. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself with the tense poise of someone keeping several secrets balanced on her shoulders. Her gloved hands twisted together as she addressed Tuppence. "Please," she said quietly, "I must buy the case back from you. I cannot explain fully, but I will pay you 10 times what you spent." Tuppence blinked, for shock and temptation rarely arrived together so neatly. 10 times?" she echoed, already intrigued. "My dear woman, that is terribly generous. Why ever is it so important?" The woman hesitated. Her eyes flicked around the room, searching for watchers. "I cannot say, but you must believe me, it is vital." Tommy, observing the tremor in her hands, felt a faint stirring of unease. Tuppence, meanwhile, seemed to grow more determined by the second. For her, mystery was a catnip far more potent than high prices. "I'm afraid I can't part with it just yet," she replied gently. "It was such a delightful find. Perhaps later." Before Tuppence could finish, the woman turned and hurried toward the exit, dropping a thin envelope as she fled. Tommy retrieved it, frowning at the delicate handwriting on its front, a single strange quotation referencing a forgotten meeting and a reckoning long overdue. Back at their cheerful home in Sutton, Tommy wasted no time teasing Tuppence. "There you are," he declared, "purchasing trouble wrapped in second-hand leather." "And a very handsome trouble it is," she retorted, settling into her favourite chair with the case on her lap. "Besides, if someone is desperate to buy it back, then the story behind it must be at least moderately thrilling." They examined the case carefully. The leather had softened with age, the brass clasp slightly tarnished. Tuppence discovered a hidden flap inside, so cleverly stitched that Tommy would have missed it entirely. Behind the flap lay a fragment of paper, brittle, yellowed, and unmistakably part of a diary page. The handwriting was bold and unmistakably confident. At the bottom glistened 3 initials, WSC. Tommy whistled softly. Winston Spencer Churchill. Tuppence tilted her head. Perhaps someone else with expensive initials. But look, this line about a meeting at a country estate, and too dangerous for any official record. Tommy, this is not merely interesting, this is practically begging for investigation. He opened his mouth to warn her against indulging dangerous curiosity, but at that moment the electric bell rang, sharp and insistent. Albert appeared in the doorway, wearing an expression of wonder and alarm. "There's another visitor," he announced, "and she looks as though she's run all the way here." It was the woman in the navy cloche hat, now pale, breathless and trembling. She stepped inside, clutching the doorframe for balance. "Please," she whispered, "do not read any further. You must not. If that diary is opened, someone will die." Before Tuppence could respond, the woman darted back into the night, leaving them with more questions than ever. Tommy crossed the room and shut the door as though sealing in the tension she had left behind. "Well," he said, "your auctions are getting livelier by the day." Tuppence didn't answer. She was already opening the fallen envelope. Inside lay a single slip of paper bearing a hurried line. "The truth sleeps only where no one seeks it." Beneath it, a strange diagonal mark within a circle. Tommy frowned. "Cryptic poetry now?" "Or a warning," Tuppence murmured. "Or perhaps a clue." She held the writing case again, turning it thoughtfully. Why offer such a sum, then return to forbid us reading it? She was terrified, yet determined. "Terrified people often are," Tommy said. "I suggest we tread carefully. A diary with Churchill's initials is nothing to trifle with." Tuppence brightened. "Which is exactly why we must find out more." Albert entered with cautious curiosity. "Should I bring tea? You both look peculiar." "Tea, please," Tommy sighed. As Albert retreated, Tuppence examined the case's interior again. A faint scent of old paper lingered. She traced the carved initials inside, CH, and considered their meaning. "Not Churchill," she said. "Someone who owned it before. Someone who hid the diary fragment." Tommy leaned over her shoulder. "Or someone who wanted it found eventually." She studied the scratch along the leather's edge. A mark made deliberately, perhaps to signal a hidden compartment, one we haven't discovered yet. "You're enjoying this rather too much," Tommy remarked. "Tosh, I'm merely doing my civic duty. And besides, mystery has a way of choosing us." She placed the diary fragment on the table between them. The words, "Too dangerous for any official record," seemed to glow faintly under the lamplight. "Tommy," she said softly, "whatever this diary contains, people are frightened enough to chase it through auctions and knock on strangers' doors." "And to threaten death," Tommy reminded her. "Yes," she replied, lifting her chin, "which means we can't ignore it." He gave her a long, familiar look, the look of a husband fully aware that the wheels of adventure had already begun turning. "Very well," he said, "but we proceed with caution." Tuppence smiled, naturally. As the clock on the mantelpiece chimed the hour, Tuppence gathered the scattered clues into a neat pile. "Tomorrow," she declared, "we start asking questions. Someone wanted this case hidden, and someone else wants it erased. Either way, Tommy, we're already in the middle of it." Absolutely inevitable. The morning began with the sort of domestic peace that rarely survived more than 5 minutes in the Beresford household. Tommy had just settled into his armchair with the newspaper when the calm was shattered by Tuppence's triumphant exclamation from the dining table. "I knew it," she cried. "There's more to this writing case than one lonely diary scrap." Tommy lowered his newspaper with the wary expression of a man expecting trouble to come trotting in wearing Tuppence's hat. She sat hunched over the writing case, hairpins threatening mutiny, eyes gleaming with investigative delight. The case lay open before her, with the reverence of an archaeological discovery. "Look at this," she said, sliding a folded paper across the table. Tommy picked it up. The paper was thin, brittle, and densely covered in shorthand symbols. "Oh, excellent," he sighed. "Ancient hieroglyphs. Your collection increases." "Don't be silly," Tuppence said. "This is shorthand. Not quite Gregg, not quite Pitman, but familiar enough. Major Harbury must have known it." "Harbury," Tommy repeated. She tapped the writing case. Engraved initials inside, C.H. Clement Harbury. The auction catalogue listed the lot as coming from his estate. Tommy sat forward. Clement Harbury. Wasn't he some sort of minor intelligence chap before the war? "Exactly," Tuppence said, pleased. "The sort who pops up in dusty files and then isn't mentioned again. Very suspicious." Tommy reached for the paper again, squinting at the shorthand. "I remember just enough from deciphering field codes to spot a theatrical flourish. This here," he pointed, "means a visitor from Chartwell, and this phrase, the keeper of the Red Room. Sounds like a child's ghost story. Or spycraft dressed up in ribbons, Tuppence countered. A meeting, perhaps, or a warning. Tommy folded the note carefully. Whatever it is, someone went to great lengths to hide it, and to retrieve it again. Tuppence nodded. Which is why we need to speak to this Julian Harbury fellow, the son. He might know whether his father was keeping secrets or keeping someone else's. Tommy reached for the telephone directory on the hall table. Henley, wasn't it? Country air, quiet lanes, and now possible treason. Delightful combination, Tuppence remarked. He had just found the listing when the familiar sound of Albert padding down the hallway interrupted him. Their loyal, if occasionally dramatic, assistant poked his head into the room. "Mr. Beresford, there's a gentleman asking for you. Says he's from the Cabinet Office. Very official-looking, very serious." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "Another one?" she murmured. "Show him in, Albert," Tommy said. Albert nodded and disappeared. After a moment, the gentleman stepped inside. He was tall, trim, impeccably groomed, and carried an air of authority as though he'd been born issuing directives. His dark coat was neatly brushed, his hat angled at the precise bureaucratic degree. But his eyes, Tommy noticed at once, were cool with calculation rather than duty. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford?" he asked smoothly. "That's right," Tommy said. The man produced a slim case and flipped it open. "I am Mr. Langford, Cabinet Office Liaison." A brief pause. "We understand you recently acquired a writing case containing classified documents." Tuppence folded her arms. "Do you? How extraordinary." Langford didn't acknowledge the sarcasm. "These documents are not suitable for civilian possession. I'm instructed to collect them immediately before their contents create complications." Tommy gestured toward the table. "May one ask how the Cabinet Office knows what we purchased at yesterday's auction?" Langford's expression flickered. Not enough for most to notice, but Tuppence caught it. "We keep informed of sensitive material as it reappears." "Reappears?" Tuppence repeated softly. He seemed irritated by her persistence. "I must stress the importance of this request. Maintaining control of certain documents prevents national consequences." Tuppence walked past him, seemingly by chance but actually to inspect. She studied his sleeve. A faint smear of printer's ink stained the cuff. Printer's ink. Her eyes sharpened. That same ink had been on the fraudulent invitation the mysterious woman dropped at the auction. Langford followed her gaze and subtly shifted his arm behind him, too late for subtlety. "Mrs. Beresford," he said sharply, "I must insist." Tommy stepped in, voice polite but firm. "Before we relinquish anything, we'd like confirmation from the proper channels." "I am the proper channels," Langford said, chilled steel layering his tone. "Possibly," Tommy replied, "but one doesn't hand over personal property because a stranger appears waving credentials. Send us a written request. On headed paper. We'll respond accordingly." Langford's jaw tightened. "If you obstruct this inquiry, you may create a very unfortunate situation." "National consequences?" Tommy suggested lightly. Langford offered the faintest, coldest smile. "Precisely." He turned on his heel and strode toward the door without another word. Albert reappeared awkwardly holding a tray of tea, nearly stepping aside as the self-appointed official brushed past him. The door clicked shut. Tommy exhaled. "I don't trust him." "Nor I," Tuppence said. "Printer's ink on his cuff. Exactly the same smear on that forged invitation. Cabinet Office officials seldom dabble in cheap printing." "Someone's staging something," Tommy murmured, reflecting aloud. "A performance, with players who know their lines a bit too well." Tuppence placed the shorthand note beside the diary fragment. "Two people want this writing case. One begs us to leave it alone. One demands we give it up. Neither seems trustworthy." Tommy nodded slowly. "There's our direction, then. Julian Harbury is our best lead." He lifted the receiver, ready to place the call, when the telephone suddenly rang first, an unexpected intrusion that made both of them jump. Tommy answered. "Beresford residence." A faint click came from the other end. No greeting, no voice. "Hello?" he said. Silence. Then another click. The line went dead. He set the receiver down carefully. "One of our admirers, perhaps?" "Or someone checking whether we're home," Tuppence said. "We must get ahead of whoever these people are." They spread the contents of the writing case across the table. Tuppence arranged them with almost scientific precision: the diary fragment, the coded shorthand, the envelope with its cryptic line, and the hidden flap scrap bearing the initials WSC. Major Clement Harbury kept this case for a reason, she said softly. He hid the diary page, he hid the shorthand, and he left clues deliberately concealed, but something, or someone, stopped him from revealing the whole story. Tommy leaned against the sideboard, arms folded. The mystery woman wanted to stop us from reading it. Mr. Inksmudge wants to confiscate it. Neither wishes the contents to be known. Tuppence nodded. Which is why we must know them. Albert cleared his throat from the doorway. If I may say so, madam, it seems a bit dangerous. Everything interesting is dangerous, Tuppence replied cheerfully. Tommy gave her a pointed look. Within limits. They spent the next hour deciphering what they could. Words emerged from the shorthand: meeting, danger, Chartwell, listener, pact. Tuppence grew more excited with each one. Tommy's expression, however, grew increasingly concerned. This feels like more than old gossip, he said. It smells of espionage. Excellent, Tuppence said. I meant the worrying sort. I meant the interesting sort, he sighed. Let's call Harbury now. But before they could, Tuppence gathered everything into the writing case and snapped it shut. Tommy, she said quietly, 3 people have tried to reach us already. 2 came to our door, 1 telephoned silently. This isn't coincidence. He met her gaze. No. She rested a hand on the writing case. Someone has staged a drama, and we've just been cast into Act 1. Tommy nodded gravely. Yes, and I suspect we haven't met the lead actor yet. He lifted the receiver to finally telephone Julian Harbury, but in Tuppence's mind the pieces were already moving. Shorthand notes, mystery visitors, forged credentials, and a writing case that had waited decades for the right hands to open it. She smiled slightly. Tommy, she said, I think someone's staging a play around us, and we haven't seen the final act. The train carriage rattled gently as it rolled toward Henley, the scenery unfolding in soft greens and muted browns. Tommy had his newspaper open but was not reading it. Tuppence, opposite him, had the writing case on her lap and was studying it as though she expected it to confess its secrets unprompted. I must say, she murmured, running a thumb along one worn edge, Major Harbury certainly knew how to pick an intriguing hideaway. Let's hope his son is more transparent, Tommy said. I've had enough of mysterious visitors for 1 week. Tuppence smiled. Tommy dear, that's nonsense. You secretly enjoy them. Only the ones who don't threaten national consequences, he replied. The train slowed as it approached Aston Wick, a small, peaceful-looking village tucked beside the river. The sound of distant church bells drifted into the carriage when the doors opened. It would have been an idyllic sort of place, rowboats drifting lazily, a dog barking from across the green, cottages glowing with sun-warmed brick, if not for the faint tension that seemed to hum beneath the surface. Something in the way the villagers glanced at newcomers suggested unease. Tuppence picked up on it immediately. Do you feel that? She whispered. It's like everyone's waiting for someone to say the wrong thing. Or for someone to come looking for something, Tommy replied. They followed the lane toward Julian Harbury's cottage, a modest but attractive home with ivy creeping along its frame. When they knocked, the door opened after a tentative pause. Julian Harbury was a lean, scholarly man in his early 40s, with spectacles that seemed perpetually ready to slide off his nose. His expression held both curiosity and apprehension. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford? He asked. I wasn't expecting you so soon. Come inside, please. They entered a study lined with books. Some shelves were tidy, but others bore signs of disorder, volumes out of place, piles stacked hurriedly. Tuppence noticed immediately. Julian motioned them to chairs before sitting opposite. Albert said on the telephone that this was about my father's writing case, but I don't understand how it came into your possession. Tuppence opened the case and laid the diary fragment on the table. Julian stiffened. We purchased it at a Kensington auction, she said, along with these contents. Julian hesitated before reaching for the paper, his fingers trembling slightly. I thought it was gone forever, he whispered. 3 nights ago, someone broke into this cottage, tore the place apart. They didn't take money or valuables, just that case. Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. You didn't alert the police? Julian shook his head. I didn't want to seem foolish. My father spoke often of possessing something too important to burn, too dangerous to keep. I thought it was just old age. He was meticulous all his life, but in his later years he drifted into odd remarks. And now? Tuppence asked gently. Now I wonder if he wasn't entirely wrong. Julian removed his spectacles, pressing the bridge of his nose. My father kept journals, lots of them, but none ever hinted at anything dangerous. Yet he was always strangely protective of that case. Tuppence leaned forward. Your father served in the early intelligence branch, didn't he? Yes, before the war. Mostly clerical work, or so he said. I never pressed him. Tommy studied Julian's uneasy posture. Major Harbury may have seen something he wasn't meant to, or kept a record someone else wanted buried. Julian returned the diary fragment with care. These initials, WSC, do they mean what I fear they mean? Tuppence nodded. Quite possibly. The room held its breath for a moment. Then, without warning, glass shattered. A stone hurtled through the side window and skidded across the floor, coming to rest against a bookshelf. Julian jumped to his feet, pale with shock. Tommy rushed to the window, careful not to slice his hands. Tuppence bent to pick up the stone. A strip of paper was tied around it, scrawled in dark ink. Stop asking about the diary. Julian sank into his chair. My God, it's happening again. Tommy scanned the garden through the jagged hole in the glass. Someone's running down the lane, he said sharply. A motorbike. Tuppence was already moving, darting past him. Tommy followed, and Julian stumbled after them, breathless with fear. They reached the front gate just as a motorbike roared past at dangerous speed. The rider wore a dark jacket, and from the sleeve trailed a long crimson scarf, fluttering like a flag. That scarf, Tuppence said under her breath. I saw it at the auction house, or I'm almost certain. You said it was distinctive, Tommy recalled. Distinctive enough that he shouldn't be too hard to trace, Tuppence said, her jaw tightening. Julian clutched the gate with shaking fingers. Mrs. Beresford, please, whoever that was, whatever this is, please leave it alone. If my father was mixed up in something dangerous, I don't want you trapped in the consequences. Tuppence turned to him, her expression softening only slightly. Mr. Harbury, I assure you, we've survived worse. But this isn't one of your investigations for fun, he pleaded. Someone clearly doesn't want you here. Someone is watching my cottage. They're willing to break in, threaten, even harm. I don't want more blood on this matter. Blood? Tommy repeated sharply. Julian shook his head quickly. A figure of speech. Just, please, go home. Forget all of this. Tuppence's eyes darkened. Warnings of that kind, she said quietly, are invitations in disguise. Tommy sighed. We won't ignore what happened here, Mr. Harbury. Nor do I believe your father wanted the truth to vanish with him. Someone else does, and that is quite another matter. Julian looked defeated. He led them back inside, stepping carefully over the broken glass. I suppose, he said wearily, if you're determined to investigate, you should at least see this. He crossed the room to a drawer that had been forced open during the previous break-in. From within he drew a faded photograph in a cracked frame. He handed it to Tuppence. 3 men stood together in the picture. The first was unmistakably Winston Churchill, slightly younger but unmistakable. Beside him stood Major Harbury, looking proud, stiff-backed and dignified. The third man was unfamiliar, tall, sharply dressed, with an expression that suggested he commanded attention even in silence. But what captured Tuppence's attention was the mark behind his left ear, a narrow, pale scar. Do you know who the third man is? She asked. Julian shook his head. No, my father never said. I found the photograph with his belongings after he passed, but he had never mentioned any meeting like this. And the scar, I only noticed it recently. Tommy studied the image. A scar like that can be identifying. We'll need to learn who he was. Tuppence slipped the photograph into the writing case. We'll take good care of it. Julian looked pained but nodded. I trust you, more than I trust anyone else who has come asking. Tommy paused. Anyone else? Julian hesitated. A man visited 2 weeks before the break-in, claimed to be from a historical records office. He asked whether my father had mentioned, well, Churchill. When I questioned him, he left abruptly. Tuppence exchanged a loaded glance with Tommy. Did he leave a name? No, just a warning that some histories are best left undisturbed. Tommy walked slowly to the shattered window. "Mr. Harbury, whether your father intended it or not, the past he touched is alive again." Tuppence placed a gentle hand on Julian's shoulder. "And running from a mystery rarely stops it from following you." Julian swallowed. "Please be careful." "We always are," Tommy said. Tuppence snorted. "That is an outrageous lie." Tommy conceded with a grin. "Almost always." They took their leave soon after, promising to contact Julian once they learned more. As they walked back toward the village, Tommy glanced at Tuppence. "Well, thoughts?" "That scar is important," she said, "and whoever wears that crimson scarf knows far too much." "Agreed." They reached the edge of the green. The church bells rang once, solemnly. A rowboat drifted by on the river. And yet, beneath the gentle village charm, a thread of danger pulled taut. Tuppence tightened her grip on the writing case. "Tommy," she said quietly, "we've just stepped into this story's shadow, and the shadow is growing." He nodded. "Which means we'll have to move faster." She smiled faintly. "Let's go home. We've got a mystery to unmask." And together they walked on, toward whatever truth Major Harbury had died keeping. The writing case sat on the centre of the drawing-room table like a guest refusing to leave. Tommy paced the rug before the hearth, hands clasped behind his back in a manner he insisted was thinking, though Tuppence always said it looked more like brooding with purpose. She, meanwhile, sat with her elbows planted firmly on the table, chin propped between her palms, staring down at the coded shorthand as though willing it to surrender a confession. "What puzzles me," she murmured, tapping the paper lightly, "is this insistence on theatrical language. Visitor from Chartwell. Keeper of the Red Room. It feels like a cipher wrapped in drama." "Early intelligence departments loved a flourish," Tommy replied. "You should have seen some of the nicknames from my own days in uniform. Men who would faint at the sight of blood were called the Lion. We all pretended not to notice." Tuppence leaned back, folding her arms. "Even so, Churchill himself featuring in the diary, even indirectly, is extraordinary." Albert floated in carrying a tea tray, wearing an expression of profound satisfaction usually reserved for moments when he felt indispensable. "I've been thinking about that Red Room bit, madam," he announced as he placed the tray down. "If it's anything to do with Mr. Churchill, he's got that big red study at Chartwell, hasn't he? Walls painted in the deep stuff, looks like a theatrical backdrop." Tuppence straightened. "The Chartwell study. Of course. But the diary doesn't say room, it says keeper. That implies a person, someone associated with that space, someone with a role." Tommy accepted a cup of tea. "A code name, perhaps? The Keeper of the Red Room. Sounds delightfully sinister." "More than sinister," Tuppence said. "Symbolic. A gatekeeper. Someone controlling access, perhaps to sensitive information." Albert nodded eagerly. "Could be someone Churchill trusted, or someone he didn't." Tuppence's mind was already racing. If Major Harbury attended a meeting at Chartwell in the early 1930s, and if Churchill was involved, then it might not be Churchill who feared exposure. It might be whoever else was there. Tommy lowered his cup. Harbury said the matter was too dangerous to keep. But dangerous to whom? Churchill had rivals, plenty of them. A scandal at the wrong moment could have changed history. "Which," Tuppence said softly, "is precisely why someone today might still fear its revelation." The room grew still. Even Albert sensed the shift in mood. "Should I fetch biscuits?" he offered uncertainly. "Not yet," Tuppence replied, "but keep the kettle hot." Albert retreated, though not without pausing to peer curiously at the coded note once more before slipping out. Tommy resumed pacing. "So, we have the diary fragments, the photograph with 3 men, one of whom we cannot identify, and now this mysterious keeper of the Red Room. It's a tangle." "Tangles are the fun part," Tuppence said cheerfully. "It's when everything becomes neat that things usually turn deadly." Tommy gave her a dry look. "Well, here's hoping we remain at the fun stage." But fate had no intention of humouring him. They had barely returned to their deciphering when the drawing-room door opened without ceremony, and the mysterious woman in the navy cloche hat slipped inside. Tuppence was on her feet at once. "You!" The woman, now visibly exhausted, her face pale and drawn, pressed a gloved finger to her lips. "Please," she whispered, shutting the door behind her. "You must listen." Tommy stepped toward her, concerned but cautious. "Albert let you in?" "No," she said breathlessly. He wasn't at the door. I waited until I saw him walk down the road toward the grocer. I could not risk being stopped." Tuppence regarded her closely. "Then we had best start with your name. You owe us that much." The woman hesitated only a moment before nodding. "My name is Evelyn Grant." "Mrs. Evelyn Grant?" Tommy asked. "Yes," she said. "I was secretary to Major Harbury for 5 years. I knew him well. I knew his habits, his anxieties, and the burden he carried." Tuppence gestured for her to sit. Mrs. Grant remained standing. "I warned you," she said quietly. "I begged you not to pursue this diary." "And we," Tuppence replied, "tend not to heed warnings from strangers unless they explain themselves." Mrs. Grant trembled, not dramatically, but in the way of someone worn down by relentless fear. "Very well," she whispered. "I will tell you what I can before—" She flinched mid-sentence as though remembering something terrible. Tommy exchanged a sharp glance with Tuppence. "Before what?" Tuppence asked carefully. Mrs. Grant looked at the writing case on the table, her expression tightening. "Before you open certain pages that were never meant for public eyes, pages that contain evidence of treason, not by Churchill, but by someone still alive, someone powerful." The room seemed to contract. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Tuppence's voice was soft. "You've seen these pages?" "I transcribed them," Mrs. Grant whispered. "I typed them, I stored them, and when Major Harbury died, I thought all of it had ended. But then men began following me, asking questions, breaking into places, searching for the case." "And the man with the crimson scarf?" Tuppence asked. Mrs. Grant's eyes widened. "You saw him?" "Oh, yes," Tuppence replied lightly. "He nearly ran us down escaping from Julian Harbury's cottage." Mrs. Grant covered her mouth with a gloved hand. "Then it's worse than I feared." Tommy stepped closer. "Who is he?" "I don't know," she said, "but he works for the one who fears the diary most." "And who is that?" Mrs. Grant opened her mouth, but before she could speak another word, her eyes fluttered strangely. She swayed. "Tuppence," Tommy began. Mrs. Grant collapsed. Tuppence lunged to catch her, but Tommy reached her first, lowering the unconscious woman to the rug. Her body was limp, too limp. "She fainted?" Tuppence asked sharply. Tommy bent over her, lifting her wrist to check the pulse. "This isn't a faint." Tuppence knelt, sniffing the air. "There's something— a scent." Tommy inhaled. "Medicinal? Ether? Or chloroform?" Tuppence ran her fingers along the back of Mrs. Grant's neck. Something small glinted there, barely visible. "A needle mark," she whispered. "Fresh." "She was injected. Someone drugged her," Tommy said grimly. "But how?" Tuppence demanded. "She came straight in. We were here the whole time." Tommy looked toward the French doors leading to the garden. "Tuppence," he said quietly, "those doors were ajar when we came back from the dining room earlier. We dismissed it, thought Albert had left them open." She turned sharply toward the glass panes. Beyond them lay the garden gate, partly visible from where they stood. Tommy rose and crossed the room in long strides. He threw open the doors and stepped outside. Tuppence followed. The garden was still. Afternoon sunlight dappled the shrubs. A sparrow hopped along the low wall. And then, a movement. A shadow slipped behind the hedge near the gate. Not running, confidently walking. Tommy reached the gate just in time to see the shape of a man turn onto the pavement. He did not look back. Tommy stood frozen for a moment, jaw tightening, hands clenched at his sides. Tuppence reached him. "He didn't run," she murmured. "He wasn't afraid." "He accomplished what he came for," Tommy said through his teeth. They returned inside at once. Mrs. Grant lay unmoving on the rug, breathing shallowly but steadily. "Whoever he was," Tuppence whispered, "he needed her silent before she explained the diary's secret." Tommy nodded grimly. And he succeeded, for now. The diary lay open on the table, the shorthand pages scattered beside it, their symbols suddenly seeming darker, heavier, and more dangerous than before. Tommy looked toward the window, toward the fading shadow beyond the garden gate. "Tuppence," he said quietly. Someone wanted her silent before she spoke. Tommy had barely hung up his coat when the telephone rang again, sharply, insistently, as though determined to interrupt any hope of calm. Tuppence, still shaken from Mrs. Grant's collapse and the shadow slipping out of their garden, crossed the room quickly. She lifted the receiver. "Beresford residence," a gruff voice spoke immediately. "Mrs. Beresford, Inspector Marston, Scotland Yard. I need you and your husband to come to Chelsea at once." Tuppence stiffened. "Is this about Mrs. Grant?" "Yes," Marston replied, "and I'm afraid you'd better hurry." Chelsea Mews No. 12 was a narrow courtyard framed by converted stables, cobbled ground, tidy flower boxes, and an unsettling quiet that didn't match its postcard charm. A constable stood guard outside the small rented flat. He stepped aside as Tommy and Tuppence approached. Inside, the scene was deceptively peaceful. A lamp glowed warmly on a side table. A teacup lay overturned on the carpet, spilling a small puddle of cold tea. A bottle of morphine rested near Mrs. Grant's hand, her still, unmoving hand. Inspector Marston stood beside her body, arms folded, brow knitted in a sceptical frown. He turned as they entered. "There you are," he said. "Found dead an hour ago. Landlady let herself in when she smelled something amiss. Claims the tenant, under the name Mrs. Grayson, kept odd hours." Tuppence moved past him slowly, her eyes scanning every detail. Mrs. Grant lay on her side, expression peaceful but too composed. Her cloche hat had been placed neatly on a chair. Her handbag sat carefully closed beside it. Tommy swallowed. "She died of the injection?" "Seems not," Marston said. "Morphine overdose. Bottle spilled beside her. Suicide note on the desk." His tone made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. Tuppence knelt beside the body, careful not to touch anything. "She wasn't left-handed." Marston raised a brow. "How can you possibly know that?" "You see how the bottle lies," Tuppence said, pointing, "placed near her left hand, but the label faces upward, not toward her. A right-handed person staging the scene." Tommy joined her. "And the cup?" "Deliberately knocked over," she murmured. "But there's dust beneath it. Look." Marston squatted down to see. Indeed, the saucer-shaped dust pattern beneath the teacup showed it hadn't recently been resting where it now lay. Tuppence inhaled slightly. "And something else. The room smells faintly of cigar smoke," Marston sniffed. "You're right, but she doesn't strike me as a cigar smoker." "She wasn't," Tuppence said. "We met her. Dainty woman, terrified woman, not the type to enjoy Havana imports." Marston sighed. "So someone stages a suicide, smokes a cigar while doing it, and leaves without being seen." Tommy glanced around. "Any neighbours report suspicious activity?" "One milkman," Marston replied. "Claims he saw a motorbike tearing through the mews just before the landlady found the body. Said the rider had a scarf, long and crimson." Tuppence stiffened. "He followed her," she whispered, "right to her hiding place." Marston eyed her sharply. "You two seem to be in the middle of this." Tuppence rose to her feet, expression hardening. "Inspector, Mrs. Grant came to our house today. She told us she knew who feared the diary's contents. She collapsed before finishing." "Collapsed?" Marston repeated. "Drugged," Tommy added. "A needle mark at the back of her neck." Marston's face darkened. "And you didn't think to call a doctor, or the police?" "Tuppence did," Tommy said defensively. "But she regained consciousness long enough to insist on leaving, and we didn't know where she was staying." The inspector regarded them both with a mixture of irritation and reluctant interest. "She used an alias, rented this place 2 weeks ago, paid in cash. Same pattern as someone expecting trouble." Tuppence stepped toward the desk. "May I?" Marston nodded, though somewhat begrudgingly. The suicide note was a short handwritten line. "I can't carry the burden any longer." "It's meaningless," Tuppence said. "Designed to mimic despair, but says nothing personal. No mention of guilt, regret, or names. A stranger could have written it." Marston pointed to a scrap of paper beside the note. "Found that under her coat." Tuppence lifted it carefully. It was torn from a larger page and typed in clean, neat letters. It read, "The Inheritance of Silence." Tommy frowned. Another poetic phrase. "Or another code name," Tuppence said softly. Marston rubbed his jaw. "You two had better start explaining this diary business." They recounted as much as they dared. The auction, Mrs. Grant's warnings, the deciphered references to Churchill and the keeper of the Red Room, the break-in at Julian Harbury's cottage, and the crimson scarf motorcyclist. Marston listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to irritation to something resembling alarm. "So," he said finally, "you're telling me a high-level scandal from the early 30s is resurfacing and someone is willing to kill to bury it?" "That," Tuppence said, "is the simplest way of putting it." Tommy folded his arms. Mrs. Grant was going to name the person behind the threats, someone alive, someone powerful. "And someone who feared exposure enough to strike twice in the same day," Tuppence added. Marston paced the small room, boots scraping the wooden floor. "Well, whatever mess you're tangled in, you need to untangle yourselves out of it. Leave this to Scotland Yard." Tuppence stared at him, unimpressed. "With respect, Inspector, Mrs. Grant came to us first because she believed you wouldn't protect her." Marston bristled. "We were tracking her already." "Not well enough," Tuppence said. Tommy winced. "Tuppence," but she continued, voice calm and razor-edged. "The man with the crimson scarf is still out there, and he knows we know too much." Marston's eyes narrowed. "Which is precisely why you are both to step back. You're civilians. This is no longer a puzzle in a writing case. It's murder." "Exactly," Tuppence replied, "and the murderer is getting bolder." Marston growled under his breath. "Mrs. Beresford, if you continue interfering, You'll what?" she asked coolly. "Arrest me for noticing what your officers missed." Tommy coughed. "Perhaps we should go home before we all say things we regret." Marston glared, then sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. "Fine, but I'm warning the both of you. Stay out of this case." Naturally, both Beresfords knew they would do no such thing. The evening air outside the mews felt heavier than usual, though the sky remained clear. Tuppence's lips were pressed together in a thin line as she and Tommy walked toward their car. "She risked her life coming to us," Tuppence whispered. "She didn't deserve to die alone in that little house." Tommy nodded. "And whoever killed her thought one stage scene would silence her truths forever." Tuppence stopped walking. "But he made mistakes." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "That cigar smoke," she said. "Whoever staged that suicide smoked cigars. And the way the dust sat beneath the teacup, he didn't understand how a real accident looks. And the needle mark, he used something fast, something that knocks you out before you can scream." "A professional," Tommy said quietly. "Or someone used to subduing witnesses," Tuppence replied. They reached the car. Tommy paused with his hand on the door. "Tuppence, Mrs. Grant's death escalates things. This isn't a matter of curiosity anymore." "It never was," she said. "Not to her. We owe her the truth." He softened. "I know." She took a breath. "And the diary fragment we found, the shorthand, the photograph, that scar, each piece leads to a third man, the listener." "That code name again," Tommy murmured. "The one who didn't want the diary found." Tuppence nodded. "If he feared exposure in the 1930s, imagine his fear now, when Mrs. Grant was risking everything to speak." Tommy leaned against the car, folding his arms. "Which means our next move must be careful." "No," Tuppence said. "It must be clever." She opened the writing case and sifted through the items. The diary scrap gleamed faintly under the street lamp. The shorthand note still baffled them, though its references now seemed heavier, more foreboding. "Tuppence, we can't just invent clues," Tommy said. "No," she replied, "but we can follow the trail, and our next step is obvious." Tommy frowned. "Is it?" She smiled. "Harbury House." Tommy blinked. "Again? We've already been once." "Yes," Tuppence said. "At night, in panic, but not with purpose. Major Harbury hid the most incriminating parts of the diary. If Mrs. Grant was silenced before naming the listener, then her secrets must still lie somewhere Harbury expected someone, perhaps his son, to find." Tommy studied her expression and recognized the spark that always meant she had made up her mind. "Julian will be terrified," he said. "He already is," she replied. "That's why we must help him." Tommy sighed. "My dear girl, you do realize this is the point in every adventure when something exceedingly dangerous happens." Tuppence slipped into the car. "Tommy, something exceedingly dangerous has already happened." He got in beside her, though he knew there was no stopping her course. "Very well," he said. "Harbury House it is. But next time someone throws a stone through a window, I demand hazard pay." Tuppence gave him a small, sad smile. If only danger paid as reliably as dull work. He started the engine. The mews fell behind them as they drove into the night, the road stretching dark and uncertain ahead. But neither spoke again for some minutes. The death of Mrs. Grant lingered heavy as smoke in the air, an unspoken vow between them. Some secrets, once disturbed, demanded to be solved, and now someone was killing to keep them buried. The lane leading to Harbury House looked entirely different under darkness, where daylight had softened the cottage's age and given the garden an air of gentle neglect. Nighttime sharpened every line. The ivy clinging to the walls resembled grasping fingers. The narrow windows glinted like suspicious eyes. Tommy and Tuppence stood at the gate, the moon casting pale light across the gravel path. "Tuppence," Tommy murmured. "Breaking and entering is generally frowned upon." "This isn't breaking," Tuppence whispered back. "We're merely taking initiative. Julian gave us his trust. We're acting on his behalf." "By entering his home uninvited?" She patted his arm affectionately. "Such a fussy man. Come along, dear." The front door was locked, of course, but Tuppence, who had long ago mastered the art of appearing entirely innocent while being nothing of the sort, retrieved a thin pick from her handbag. Tommy shot her a glance. "Why do you even own that?" "Hobbies," she said briskly. The door clicked open in under a minute. Inside, the house greeted them with an uneasy stillness. Wooden beams overhead creaked faintly, responding to the cool air drifting in behind them. The hallway smelled of old books and stale smoke, the lingering memory of Major Harbury's presence, perhaps. Tommy closed the door quietly. "We make this quick," he said. "Whatever's going on, Mrs. Grant's death proves we're all running out of time." Tuppence nodded, though her eyes gleamed with an excitement she could not entirely help. The study first. Major Harbury hid things where he worked. They moved through the corridor, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. The study door creaked softly as Tuppence pushed it open. Inside, the room seemed frozen in the decade of its last organized use. Tall shelves sagged under the weight of books. Loose papers were stacked on the desk. The cold fireplace was half filled with crumbling ash. A single leather chair sat askew, as if someone had hurriedly risen from it. Tommy pulled out a small torch and trained it on the shelves. "We need to think like Harbury. If he was hiding incriminating documents, he'd conceal them somewhere personal, somewhere unlikely to be disturbed." Tuppence ran her fingers over the spines of the books, or somewhere someone else wouldn't notice. She tugged at a volume of Naval Intelligence Reports, 1928. It didn't budge. Tommy examined the desk drawers. "Locked," he murmured. "Not for long," Tuppence said, producing a second tool from her handbag. Tommy sighed. "Hobbies?" "Expanding ones." The drawer opened with a soft pop. Inside lay yellowed correspondence, a fountain pen, and a small metal switch half hidden beneath the lining. Tuppence flicked it. Nothing happened. She frowned. "Curious." Tommy was about to pull the drawer further when he froze. "Listen." A faint hum, not electrical but mechanical. A low, steady buzz emanating from behind one of the bookshelves. Tuppence moved toward it, torch in hand, and pressed her ear against the wall. "It's coming from behind here." They searched along the shelf for a hidden latch or catch. Tommy's fingers brushed against the back panel, and it shifted. Tuppence's breath caught. "Tommy, someone installed a listening device." Behind the loosened panel was a crude setup, wires leading to a compact recorder, clearly modern. A small microphone had been threaded through drilled holes between the books. "Someone's been monitoring Julian Harbury," Tommy whispered. "Recently." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "The listener," she murmured. "The one afraid of the diary." Tommy examined the recorder. Battery still warm. Whoever placed this was here not long ago. Tuppence scanned the room, and perhaps came back after Julian left for his lecture tonight. Tommy replaced the panel and turned toward the far wall. Harbury was careful. If he suspected surveillance, he'd hide things more thoroughly. Tuppence's torch beam landed on a framed photograph on the wall. Major Harbury in uniform, shaking hands with another officer. "Photographs," she said. "People hide safes behind them." Before Tommy could protest, she lifted the frame. As expected, a square indentation revealed a wooden panel with an edge that could be pried open. Tommy used his penknife to loosen it. Behind the panel was a narrow recess containing 3 items. A small, unmarked key, a folded diary page, A train ticket stub. Tuppence reached for the folded page first. Unfolded, it revealed a brief but ominous line typed neatly. The Ashbourne Pact must remain buried. Tommy's brows was lifted. Ashbourne, that name sounds familiar. It should, Tuppence replied. Sir Lionel Ashbourne, politician. Scandal in the early 30s but never proven. He resigned quietly and disappeared from public life. Tommy held up the train ticket. Date: 3 days before Major Harbury's death. Destination: Paddington to Tunbridge Wells. Tunbridge Wells, Tuppence repeated. That's miles from Harbury's usual routes. And the key? Tommy asked, rolling it between his fingers. No markings. Could be for anything. A locker, a box, a bank deposit. Or nothing important at all, Tuppence said. Not everything hidden is significant. Tommy nodded. Which is why it might be a red herring. Tuppence returned the items to her bag. We'll puzzle them out later. For now. A sound interrupted her. A footstep. Then another. Soft, deliberate, approaching from the corridor. Tommy extinguished the torch instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. Behind the desk, he whispered. They ducked behind the large mahogany desk just as the study door burst open. A beam of harsh white light cut across the room, someone holding a torch. Tuppence's heart thudded. She recognized the silhouette instantly. The motorcyclist, the one with the crimson scarf. He moved with purpose, sweeping the torchlight across the shelves, desk and fireplace. He began yanking open drawers, overturning papers, tossing books aside. Tuppence's pulse quickened. He's searching for the diary pages, or the key, or both. Tommy tensed as the man moved closer. The intruder grunted in frustration. He crossed to the fireplace and crouched, examining the ashes. He struck a match, using its glow to inspect the soot. The match burned down. He dropped it, carelessly. It landed on the carpet, still burning. Tommy saw it instantly. His breath caught as the ember smouldered against the fabric. He wants to burn the house, Tuppence whispered in horror, lips barely moving. The motorcyclist cursed under his breath and stood abruptly. He strode toward the door, torch beam steady and silent. He left. Tommy waited 5 seconds, then 10. When the footsteps faded completely, he leapt out and snuffed the burning match with his shoe. Damn, he muttered. If we hadn't been here, Tuppence rose shakily. He would have lit a bigger fire, searched for proof, then destroyed everything. Tommy retrieved the smouldered match and examined its charred tip. This isn't someone careless. This is someone desperate. And someone working under pressure, Tuppence said. Fast, brutal, but frightened. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Frightened? Yes, she said, her voice low and steady. A man like that doesn't scare easily. But he scares too quickly. He reacts instead of thinking. He moves with urgency, not strategy. She looked toward the door through which he'd vanished. Which means, she continued softly, he's working for someone even more frightened. Tommy nodded slowly. And someone who believes, Tuppence finished, that whatever lies in Harbury's secrets could destroy him. The morning sun hit the dining room window at an odd angle, sharp, direct, almost judgmental, as though it disapproved of how little Tommy and Tuppence had slept. The writing case lay open between them on the table, its contents arranged with the precision of a battlefield. Tommy leaned over the shorthand notes, eyes narrowed, while Tuppence nursed a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. Tommy, she said at last, you're squinting in that particular way which suggests inspiration, or a headache. It's inspiration, he muttered, although the headache is threatening. He tapped a line in the shorthand with the end of his pencil. This symbol here, Albert said the Red Room refers to Churchill's study, but it's more than a location. It's a title. A title, Tuppence repeated. Such as? Keeper wasn't poetic dramatics, it was a code name. Intelligence departments adored grandiose designations, and I recall hearing something once, years ago, something about a man referred to as the Keeper of the Red Room. Tuppence leaned forward. Go on? Tommy sat back, rubbing his temples. Sir Lionel Ashbourne. Tuppence blinked. Ashbourne? But he disappeared from public life decades ago. Precisely, Tommy replied, after a bribery scandal that never quite made the papers. Some whispered it involved foreign contracts. Others said it was silenced quietly. And Harbury knew him? Tuppence asked. More than knew him, Tommy said. Ashbourne, Harbury and Churchill were involved in something together, something Harbury documented, something Ashbourne didn't want written down. Tuppence drew a slow breath. Ashbourne, a powerful man, a dangerous man, and if he was the keeper of the Red Room, then he must be the listener. Yes, Tommy said softly. The one who controlled the meeting, the one who decided what got reported and what vanished. And the one terrified now, Tuppence added, that Harbury's diary might reveal the truth. They exchanged a glance, one part triumph, one part dread. Tuppence stood abruptly. We need corroboration. Tommy followed her into the hall. Where? To the only person still alive who might have known Ashbourne before he disappeared, she said. Someone who remembers the early 1930s. An historian? Tommy asked. No, Tuppence said, grabbing her coat. A journalist. The journalist lived in a cluttered townhouse near Blackfriars, its windows layered with dust and its garden overgrown. A brass plaque by the door read, Mr. Frederick Pembleton, retired correspondent in faded letters. Tuppence knocked firmly. After a long moment, the door opened just wide enough to reveal a sliver of a narrow face and one suspicious eye. Yes? Who? Mr. Pembleton, Tuppence asked politely. My husband and I wish to speak with you regarding Sir Lionel Ashbourne. The door snapped open fully. Come in, the old man said sharply, waving them through. If you're here about Ashbourne, you're either fools, historians, or trouble. Possibly all three. Tommy gave a weak smile. We're still deciding. The interior of the townhouse was chaos wrapped in dust. Newspapers lay in towers. Bookshelves teetered dangerously. A kettle rattled on a sputtering gas ring. Sit, Pembleton commanded, motioning to two mismatched chairs. Tell me what you know. They summarized everything. Harbury, the diary, the shorthand, Mrs. Grant, the crimson scarf motorcyclist, and their recent discovery in Harbury House. Pembleton listened with the focus of a man accustomed to catching lies, interruptions, and missing pieces. When they finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. Ashbourne, he began, was a brilliant devil, charming, calculating, always 5 steps ahead, but he had one weakness. Money? Tuppence guessed. No, Pembleton said. Fear, the kind bred from knowing too much and trusting no one. Tommy nodded slowly. Churchill wanted a rogue agent arrested, didn't he? Pembleton's eyes gleamed. Yes, early 30s. British defence secrets were leaking. Churchill suspected a mole. Ashbourne wanted the matter hushed to prevent a diplomatic scandal. And Major Harbury? Tuppence asked. Harbury was the quiet one, Pembleton said. Kept meticulous notes. Ashbourne hated that. Called him a scribe with an inconvenient conscience. That's why Ashbourne insisted on controlling the meeting at Chartwell. They used that damned code name, the keeper of the Red Room. Tommy felt the pieces sliding neatly into place. Ashbourne is the listener. Pembleton nodded grimly. Oh, he listened all right, and he remembered, but Harbury wrote everything down. Insurance, he called it. Insurance that someone wants destroyed, Tommy murmured. Pembleton sighed. Ashbourne had a habit, a nervous tic. He tugged at his left earlobe whenever pressed. Drove Churchill mad. Tuppence froze. She reached into her handbag and pulled out the photograph Julian Harbury had given them. Is this Ashbourne? She asked. Pembleton adjusted his spectacles, examining the photo closely. Younger? But yes. That scar behind the ear. He got that in a motor accident. A foolish story he always told. Tommy inhaled sharply. So the photograph connects Churchill, Harbury, and Ashbourne, all together. Pembleton's expression darkened. Which means you're playing with dynamite, Beresfords. Ashbourne vanished for a reason. Men like him don't simply retire. They recede into the shadows because they've arranged them carefully. Tuppence swallowed. Mr. Pembleton, is he still alive? Unfortunately, Pembleton said, and I'd wager he knows you're looking. Tommy exchanged a tense glance with Tuppence. We must find the rest of the diary before he does. Pembleton leaned forward suddenly. You found a key, didn't you? Tommy and Tuppence froze. Pembleton chuckled. Harbury wasn't subtle. If he wanted insurance kept safe, it wouldn't be in his house. It would be stored somewhere official, somewhere guarded. What are you suggesting? Tommy asked. Where do men hide secrets they cannot risk destroying? Pembleton asked, eyes narrowing. Tuppence frowned. A vault? Pembleton nodded. Yes. A safe deposit box. Harbury had one. I interviewed him once, years ago. He mentioned having documents too important to leave at home. As if on cue, a sudden noise erupted in the stairwell, a scuffling sound, a grunt, then a sharp thud. Pembleton turned, startled. What the? Before anyone could react, a dark figure heaved forward from the top of the staircase, a man who toppled and tumbled violently down the steps, landing in a crumpled heap at the bottom. Tommy darted forward. Pembleton! The old journalist groaned, his legs twisted awkwardly beneath him. Tuppence knelt beside him, face pale. Mr. Pembleton, can you hear me? Pembleton opened his eyes, dazed. He tried to speak, but coughed instead. Tuppence scanned the stairs. No attacker in sight. The door upstairs had clicked. He was pushed, she said sharply. Someone was listening. Tommy looked at Pembleton urgently. Who was it? Did you see? Pembleton lifted a shaking hand toward Tommy. His voice rasped little more than a whisper. Bank, vault. His arm fell weakly back to the floor. He slipped into unconsciousness. Tommy checked his pulse. Alive. We need an ambulance immediately. Tuppence ran to the telephone. She dialed for assistance while Tommy remained beside the fallen journalist. Minutes later, paramedics arrived. They lifted Pembleton gently, preparing him for transport. One paramedic glanced at Tommy. He's breathing but weak. Can you follow to the hospital? We will, Tommy promised. As they carried Pembleton out, Tuppence looked toward the stairs. Someone wanted him silenced. Tommy nodded grimly. We arrived just in time for the attempt, but not in time to stop it. Tuppence shivered. He said bank vault. The key, Tommy. Harbury's unmarked key. And the final diary pages lie inside it, Tommy said, which means Ashbourne's agents are already moving. Tuppence turned sharply toward the door. Then so must we. And quickly, Tommy added, before the listener listens again. They stepped into the bright street, the wheels of the ambulance already turning. Tuppence looked down at the writing case clutched in her arms. The keeper of the Red Room, she whispered. Ashbourne. Alive. Dangerous. Desperate. Tommy touched her shoulder. Then we're closer than ever. Yes, she said softly, and that means the shadows are closing in. They stood for a moment, anchored in the realization that the clues they'd gathered, the photograph, the shorthand, the key, had all pointed them to the same truth. The final diary pages were no longer in Harbury House, not hidden in study walls, not buried beneath floorboards, but locked in a bank vault, a vault Ashbourne's men would reach soon. Tommy exhaled. Tuppence, he said, we're running out of time. She met his gaze steadily. Then let's run faster. And together they turned down the street, already planning their next move, into the lion's den where history's most dangerous secret awaited them. The London Trust and Security Bank did not welcome visitors so much as tolerate them. Its vast Art Deco facade loomed above the pavement, all polished stone and vertical lines stretching skyward like frozen pillars of authority. Tommy and Tuppence stood before its brass-framed entrance, the mysterious key heavy in Tommy's coat pocket and the weight of history, dangerous history, settling around them like an invisible fog. Tuppence stared up at the building's imposing frontage, lips tightening. Tommy, look at it. It practically screams secrets buried inside. Tommy adjusted his tie. Or, don't come in unless you're wearing a suit worth more than your mortgage. We're here on legitimate business, Tuppence insisted. Tommy gave her a look. Are we? Well, she conceded, legitimate for us business. They stepped inside. The bank's lobby was overwhelmingly grand. High ceilings painted in stylized geometric patterns, marble floors that echoed under every footstep, and polished brass counters where clerks in tailored uniforms tended to customers with practiced precision. A chandelier of chrome and crystal sparkled overhead, though its light seemed cold rather than welcoming. Tuppence nudged Tommy. We're drawing eyes already. Impossible, Tommy murmured. We're far too charming. But even he had to admit the clerk nearest them was watching with interest as they approached the reception counter. The man behind it, a neat fellow with slicked hair and thin spectacles, offered a polite but guarded smile. How may we assist you today? Tommy produced the key. We believe this belongs to one of your deposit boxes, possibly an older account. The clerk took the key, examined it, then stiffened almost imperceptibly. "One moment, please." He disappeared into the back office. Tuppence leaned close to Tommy. He recognized it. "He certainly reacted," Tommy agreed, "but not happily." The clerk returned with a manager in tow, a tall man with steel-grey hair, immaculate posture, and the calm expression of someone trained to keep every emotion sealed beneath professionalism. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "I'm Mr. Hartwell, branch manager. May I see the key?" Tommy handed it over. Hartwell turned the small, unmarked metal key in his fingers, studying it. "This corresponds to a safe deposit box opened many years ago by a Major Clement Harbury." Tuppence's breath caught. "So it is his?" "Yes," Hartwell said. "However, the account has been dormant since his passing. May I inquire how this key came into your possession?" Tommy gave him the prepared story. "We are acting on behalf of his son, Julian Harbury. The key was among the late Major's personal effects." Hartwell's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "I see. In that case, you will need to sign a custodial access authorization." "Of course," Tommy said. Hartwell motioned to a clerk. "Prepare the forms." The clerk nodded and hurried off. Tuppence glanced around. Something felt off. The air had changed, subtle but tangible. The clerks exchanged murmurs. The receptionist checked the entrance with increasing frequency. "Tommy," she whispered, "something is wrong." "Such as?" "Everyone is waiting for someone." Tommy scanned the room. "Or something." Hartwell returned. "We must verify the authorization. It will only take a few minutes." "And the deposit box?" Tuppence asked. "Once we have verification," Hartwell repeated, "we will escort you to it." He gave a thin smile, not unfriendly but unquestionably stalling. Tuppence took one step closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Hartwell, is someone else interested in this account?" Hartwell flinched, barely noticeable but enough to confirm everything. Before he could respond, the entrance doors slammed open. A gust of wind swept in, and with it, the motorcyclist. He wore no helmet today, revealing sharp, angular features and eyes that glinted with cold purpose. The infamous crimson scarf fluttered around his neck like a warning flag. Gasps rippled across the lobby. Tuppence whispered, "Oh no." He stormed inside, pushing past startled patrons. "Where is box 317? He barked, voice echoing. The clerk nearest him paled. "Sir, you can't." The man swept past him. Two guards moved toward him. He shoved one aside and glared at the second with enough menace to halt him mid-step. Tommy grabbed Tuppence's arm. "Now!" They ducked behind a marble column as the motorcyclist reached Hartwell. "Box 317, now." Hartwell stiffened. "Sir, I can't." The motorcyclist slammed a hand onto the counter. "You can, and you will." A woman screamed somewhere in the lobby as he yanked a small metal tool from his pocket. More threat than weapon, but enough to create chaos. People scattered. Tommy pulled Tuppence toward the secure hallway leading to the vault area. In the confusion, a guard yelled, "Stop! Authorized personnel only!" But the guard was immediately distracted by the intruder. Tuppence hissed, "Quickly, before Hartwell recovers." They slipped through the heavy door just as a clerk fumbled with a ringing phone and security alarm lights flickered uncertainly. The corridor beyond was lined with small lockers, a vault-heavy door at the end. The air smelled of disinfectant and metal polish. "Box 317, Tommy muttered. "Left-hand row." They hurried down the corridor. Tuppence scanned the numbers. 315, 316, there. Tommy inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock turned. But before he could pull the drawer out, a thunderous crash echoed behind them. The door to the secure area burst open. The crimson scarf motorcyclist stumbled inside, having evidently broken through two separate guards. He snarled, "Move aside!" Tommy yanked the drawer fully open and grabbed its contents just as the motorcyclist lunged. Tuppence shoved the drawer closed, forcing the intruder backward. The diary, large, leather-bound and wrapped in dark oilcloth, fell into Tommy's arms. But something else slipped out onto the floor. A sealed envelope marked in bold ink. For Churchill alone. The motorcyclist dove for it. So did Tuppence. She reached it first, scooping it up and scrambling back toward Tommy. Bank security surged into the hall behind the intruder. Two guards tackled him from behind. He slammed into the floor, struggling violently. "Get off me!" he roared. Tuppence pressed herself against the wall, clutching the envelope tightly. Tommy held the diary to his chest, breathing hard. A guard wrestled the intruder's arm behind his back. Another pinned his legs. The crimson scarf fell loose on the ground like spilled blood. Hartwell burst in moments later, pale and trembling. "How did he— Are you two—" "We're fine," Tommy panted. Tuppence held up the envelope. "He wanted this." Hartwell swallowed. "We'll have him arrested immediately." But Tuppence wasn't listening anymore. She stared at the sealed envelope, fascination and fear mingling across her expression. "For Churchill alone," she murmured. "Imagine what must be inside." Tommy touched her shoulder. "We should leave before Ashbourne's men send reinforcements." Hartwell gestured to the guards. "Escort these two out discreetly, and for heaven's sake, increase security." They hurried back through the corridor as more bank staff swarmed to contain the chaos. The guards ushered them into a private side exit, away from the main lobby where murmurs and confusion still swirled like stirred dust. Outside, the street noise felt startlingly normal. Cars passing, a newspaper boy shouting headlines, a dog barking at a lamppost. Tuppence exhaled shakily. "Tommy, we did it." He nodded, still gripping the diary. "We reached it before he did." "And we have the envelope," she said, holding it up carefully. "And we survived," Tommy added. Tuppence leaned against a low stone wall, catching her breath. "Do you think that motorcyclist works directly for Ashbourne?" Tommy considered the question. If he does, Ashbourne is desperate, dangerous, and losing control. "Then Ashbourne will strike again," Tuppence said. They walked slowly toward their car. Tommy glanced at the diary. "We now hold the complete truth Harbury tried to hide." Tuppence tapped the envelope. "And whatever Churchill wrote, and meant only for certain eyes." They reached the end of the block. Tuppence paused, her expression shifting to something softer, more thoughtful. "Tommy," she said quietly, "what if the envelope doesn't contain what we expect? What if it isn't political at all?" "It could be a red herring," Tommy admitted, "or something personal, or something dangerous only in the wrong hands." Tuppence slipped the envelope into her handbag with extreme care. "Either way, we must read it. Carefully." Tommy nodded. "But not here, and not now." Tuppence turned toward him. "We should go home, gather our thoughts, and decide our next step." Tommy agreed, but as they stepped into the car, he glanced once more at the sealed documents lying between them, the diary wrapped tight, the envelope tucked safely beside it. The weight of it felt immense. "Tuppence," he whispered, almost reverent. "Now we hold the truth, but the truth might be explosive enough to sink half the government." Tuppence met his gaze. "Then let's handle it carefully," she whispered, "before someone else tries to silence it forever." And together, with secrets in hand and danger at their heels, they drove away from the vault that had nearly become their tomb, knowing the next move belonged to them alone. The War Office storeroom had not been used in years. Dust lined the baseboards like settled snow, and the overhead lights hummed as if surprised to have been awakened after such a long sleep. Boxes marked "Confidential Archives" sat stacked neatly along the walls, though the paper seals had yellowed to a brittle fragility. Tommy and Tuppence entered quietly, shutting the door behind them. In the centre of the room, illuminated by a single desk lamp, sat a stooped, bespectacled man with silver hair and a countenance as wrinkled as parchment, Mr. Leonard Avery, archivist of 4 decades and one of the few living custodians of secrets time had tried to bury. Avery looked up as they approached. "Well," he said, in a dry voice that had not lost its humour, "I thought you two might arrive carrying a batch of old newspapers. Instead you bring a political bombshell." Tuppence placed the leather-bound diary on the desk. Major Harbury kept his records meticulously. "So he did," Avery murmured, running a reverent hand across the cracked binding. "The man was a meticulous chronicler of truth, a talent that can cause immense trouble." Tommy produced the envelope marked "For Churchill alone." Avery's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, private correspondence. Dangerous in the right hands, and lethal in the wrong." He opened the diary carefully, turning each page as if handling a relic. The entries were dense with observation. Names, dates, coded references, discussions held behind locked doors. Tommy and Tuppence watched silently as Avery read, the lamp casting long shadows over his concentrated expression. After several minutes, Avery closed the diary slowly. "It is as you feared," he said. "Perhaps worse." Tuppence exchanged a tense look with Tommy. "Tell us." Avery folded his hands. Ashbourne was negotiating with a foreign power, quietly, and not for Britain's benefit, nor even for political gain. He planned to profit personally by steering defence contracts under the table, millions in today's terms. Tommy leaned against the desk. "And Churchill discovered it?" Avery nodded. "Churchill confronted him at Chartwell. Harbury recorded the entire meeting. It is all here, the heated argument, Churchill demanding Ashbourne's resignation, Ashbourne threatening to ensure Britain never learns of its hero's failings." Tuppence inhaled sharply. He threatened Churchill. In his own refined, poisonous way, Avery said, he suggested that Churchill's own reputation would be smeared if word leaked out. Harbury, meanwhile, kept the diary as a shield. Tommy rubbed the back of his neck. "And that shield has now put everyone connected to it in danger." "Indeed," Avery replied, Mrs. Grant included. Tuppence swallowed. "She tried to protect the truth, and she died for it." Avery reached for the sealed envelope. This might provide context Churchill wished only Harbury to see. He opened it with a thin paper knife. Inside was a single handwritten letter, simple paper, faintly scented with old ink and the unmistakable flourish of Churchill's penmanship. Avery read aloud, "Harbury, your loyalty serves Britain beyond measure. Destroy the diary when the threat is ended. Keep it only if the man strikes again. If he does, let the truth save the country he tried to sell. WSC." Silence settled heavily over the room. Tommy closed his eyes briefly. Churchill knew Ashbourne would try again. Tuppence's voice was quiet but firm, and Ashbourne feared Harbury too much to allow him to keep the diary. He must have orchestrated the break-in that terrified Julian. He wanted the diary before it reached any eyes but his own. Avery placed the letter back in its envelope. This evidence could destroy Ashbourne's legacy, ruin his family's standing, and ignite a scandal that would echo through Parliament. Tommy nodded. "He'll be desperate." "Desperate," Tuppence added, "and dangerous." A faint sound interrupted them. A footstep, then another. Tommy and Tuppence spun around. The door to the storeroom had opened silently. Standing in the doorway was Sir Lionel Ashbourne, but he was not the imposing figure from Harbury's photograph. The man before them was older, frailer, his once regal posture bent with age. His face, however, retained its cutting sharpness, and his eyes, dark, deep-set, still held the cold intelligence that had made him feared in the corridors of power. Behind him stood two men in dark coats, quiet, poised, unmistakably operatives. Ashbourne's voice was soft but unwavering. "Mr. Avery, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, you have something that belongs to Britain." Tuppence straightened. "Britain? Or you, Sir Lionel?" Ashbourne entered fully, moving with slow, deliberate steps. Those pages must never see the light of day. They would harm the nation's memory. They would tarnish heroes. Tommy stepped forward. "Churchill wrote to Harbury to keep the diary safe in case you tried to strike again." Ashbourne's lips twitched in a thin smile. Churchill was a man of passion, easily clouded by his own righteousness. Tuppence scoffed. Better righteousness than treason. The operative stepped closer. Ashbourne gestured, and they halted. He turned his cold gaze upon Tuppence. "Mrs. Grant should have known better than to revisit old ghosts. Loyalty born of fear is unstable. She gave me no choice." "You murdered her," Tuppence said, voice trembling with fury. Ashbourne lifted a hand. "Spare me your dramatics. Mrs. Grant had loyalty to Harbury, yes, but she was not strong. She doubted me. She whispered too loudly. She threatened far more by flailing in panic." Tommy's hands clenched into fists. "And Pembleton?" "An unfortunate accident," Ashbourne replied. "He was fond of stairs. One simply hastened his descent." Avery stood. "Sir Lionel, this is madness. You've committed crimes far beyond your past sins." Ashbourne's voice hardened. "And all in the name of preserving Britain's dignity." "You mean your own?" Tuppence shot back. Ashbourne moved closer to her. "Dignity is a fragile thing, Mrs. Beresford. Once broken, it shatters entire reputations. Tommy stepped between them. You won't leave with the diary. Ashbourne waved a hand at his operatives. Take it. The two men advanced. Tuppence grabbed the diary and stumbled back toward Avery's desk. Tommy braced himself beside her, breath taut. Ashbourne watched, face unreadable. Do not make this difficult, he murmured. I am old, but I am not finished. History will understand. It always forgives those who act in its best interest. Tuppence glared, not when those hands are stained with blood. The operatives lunged. Before they could reach Tommy and Tuppence, the storeroom door burst open. Stop! A commanding voice shouted. Inspector Marston strode in, flanked by half a dozen uniformed officers. Revolvers were raised in practiced alignment. Marston's voice cut through the room like steel. Hands where I can see them! Step away from the Beresfords! Ashbourne's operatives froze. One officer kicked aside their hidden weapons. Another twisted their arms behind their backs, snapping handcuffs into place. Ashbourne himself did not flinch. He merely straightened slowly, chin lifting with the weary pride of a cornered aristocrat. Marston advanced. Sir Lionel Ashbourne, you are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and treasonous acts pending investigation. Ashbourne's voice was soft, almost gentle. Inspector, you have no idea the magnitude of the forces you are meddling with. Marston stepped forward, unperturbed. I've met enough liars to know when one is merely old, cornered, and full of excuses. Tuppence held the diary close, her breath trembling. Tommy placed a steadying hand on her back. Ashbourne's gaze drifted from them to the diary, to the envelope, then back to Tuppence. You believe yourselves heroes, he whispered. But history will decide who saved Britain and who doomed her. Tuppence looked him dead in the eye. History has already decided, and it wasn't you. As two officers took Ashbourne by the arms, guiding him toward the door, he paused beside Tommy. His voice was low, a venomous whisper meant for them alone. History will forgive me, he murmured, but I will not forgive you. Tommy did not blink. We'll live with that. Ashbourne's eyes burned with cold fury, but he said nothing more. He was escorted out, his operatives stumbling behind him. Silence fell again. Marston turned to Tommy and Tuppence, exhaustion etched in his features. You two, he said, are relentless troublemakers. Tuppence managed a small, breathless smile. You're welcome, Inspector. Marston pinched the bridge of his nose. I should arrest you for obstruction. But you won't, Tommy said lightly, because we just helped you catch the biggest fish of your career. Marston exhaled. Unfortunately, yes. He nodded toward the diary. Hold on to that until we arrange secure transfer. And do not go wandering into any more political conspiracies. Tuppence tucked the envelope safely away. No promises. Marston sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. As he strode out, officers trailing behind him, Avery eased back into his chair, wiping his brow. Well, he said faintly, I dare say you've just reshaped a portion of British history. Tommy took Tuppence's hand. Perhaps, he said, but the truth is safer now. Tuppence looked at the diary, Harbury's legacy of courage, and the envelope of Churchill's instructions. It's not history that forgives or condemns, she murmured. It's the people who choose to remember. And together they stepped out of the storeroom, leaving behind the shadows of old treason, and stepping toward the final revelation their dangerous adventure had yet to unfold. The morning after Ashbourne's arrest felt strangely quiet, as though the city itself were exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Tommy and Tuppence stood inside the discreet archival office attached to the War Records Department, an unremarkable brick building in Westminster whose modest appearance belied the weight of history housed within. Mr. Leonard Avery, restored by tea and indignant adrenaline, guided them through a polished corridor toward a secure document chamber. Behind reinforced glass and brass railings, archivists moved with purposeful calm, carrying files wrapped in linen and tagged with careful handwriting. Few documents, Avery murmured, carry both the burden of truth and the luxury of discretion. Churchill's private correspondence is among them. He motioned for Tommy to place the diary and the sealed envelope upon a velvet-lined tray. The archivist receiving them bowed his head slightly, the gesture of someone handling not paper, but legacy. We will maintain Churchill's wishes, the man said quietly. "The letter will remain sealed from the public. The diary will be stored securely, accessible only under conditions of historic relevance." Tuppence exhaled softly. Harbury would have approved. Avery adjusted his spectacles. He certainly would. Harbury wanted the truth recorded, not paraded. And now, thanks to you both, that truth is preserved, without weaponization, without scandal-mongering. Tommy allowed himself a small smile. "We do aim for tidy endings." Avery chuckled. "In my 40 years of archival work, nothing has been tidy, but this comes remarkably close." There was a knock at the chamber door. Inspector Marston entered, his familiar frown in place, though it looked less fierce today, almost softened, as if he'd discovered smiling was not entirely fatal. "Beresford's," he said, arms folded. "I suppose congratulations are in order, or reprimands. I haven't decided." Tuppence flashed him an innocent smile. "We accept both, Inspector, preferably in equal measure to keep life balanced." Marston snorted. "If you'd stayed balanced, we wouldn't have half of London's security personnel cleaning up Ashbourne's mess." "Ah," Tommy said lightly, "but then you wouldn't have caught him." A reluctant, grudging pause. "True," Marston admitted. He stepped closer, regarding them with a blend of suspicion, admiration, and mild horror, the typical cocktail Tommy and Tuppence seemed to evoke in respectable law enforcement. "If you hadn't meddled," Marston said slowly, "Ashbourne might have succeeded. He nearly vanished behind political immunity 2 decades ago. This time, you cornered him." Tuppence tilted her head. "Does that mean you're grateful?" Marston exhaled sharply. "Let's not be absurd, but—" He cleared his throat. "Thank you." Tuppence beamed. Tommy tried to look modest. Marston wasn't finished. "And remember, if you ever decide to help Scotland Yard again, kindly warn me first. Or better, don't help at all." He strode away before they could reply. Avery returned, hands clasped. "The archivists will complete the intake. You've done your duty. Now go home. Rest. Try not to attract any more clandestine statesmen." "We'll try," Tommy said. With enthusiasm, Tuppence added, though the glint in her eye suggested no such promise. Julian Harbury arrived just as they stepped outside. He hurried toward them, jacket flapping, spectacles askew, looking frailer than when they'd last seen him. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," Julian exclaimed, breathless. "Inspector Marston told me everything. I don't know how to thank you. My father's name, his integrity, they're safe now, because of you." Tuppence touched his arm gently. "Your father was brave. He recorded truths few men would dare." Julian nodded, swallowing hard. "I was afraid the diary would become tabloid fodder, or used for political score settling. But now it's in the right place." Tommy offered a reassuring smile. "Your father's courage will be remembered properly, not twisted." Julian nodded again, looking relieved for the first time in days. "I'm going back to Aston Wick. Perhaps life will feel ordinary again." Tuppence squeezed his shoulder. "Ordinary is underrated." Julian managed a tired smile before departing. Tommy watched him go. "Good man," he murmured. Tuppence linked her arm with his. Good father, too, and better than he knew. By the time they arrived home, Albert was waiting in the sitting room, hands behind his back and expression solemn. "There you are, sir, madam," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd run off to join the Foreign Office." Tuppence laughed. "Nothing so glamorous." Albert's gaze dropped to the writing case still tucked under her arm. "And that," he said sternly, "is coming with me." Tuppence blinked. "Pardon?" Albert stepped forward like a schoolmaster addressing a troublesome pupil. "Madam, with all due respect, every time you buy something from an auction house, bodies appear. Threats get made, people faint in dramatic fashion, policemen turn up at the door, and I, Albert, must polish the silver." Tommy coughed. "Albert?" "No, sir," Albert said, raising a hand. "I am confiscating that writing case until further notice. It is a murder magnet." He reached for it. Tuppence pulled it back playfully. "Albert, it's harmless now. The only danger it holds is the possibility of dust." "Dust, yes," Albert muttered. "And probably fingerprints, secrets, and something that hisses when you open it." Tommy sat down, grinning. "You're being unreasonable." Albert glared. "Sir, Unreasonable is following you two into your adventures, which, I remind you, I did during the war. I have earned the right to call household objects cursed." Tuppence gave him a fond smile. "Albert, dear, we promise to behave." Albert folded his arms. "Until when?" "Until the next irresistible adventure calls," Tommy said before he could stop himself. Tuppence beamed. Albert groaned. "Exactly what I feared," Albert sighed. "I'll make tea. You two clearly need supervision." He stomped off toward the kitchen. Tommy collapsed into an armchair. "Well, that's that." Tuppence settled on the sofa, stretching her legs gracefully. "I must say, Tommy, I thought the keeper of the Red Room would be something far more romantic." "Oh, this was romantic," Tommy said, "in a nearly being shot, nearly being burned alive sort of way." She laughed softly. Poor Ashbourne. All that scheming, all that ambition, and in the end, a little diary undid him. "A diary," Tommy said. "And you." "Us," she corrected. "Mostly you," he said. "Tommy," she said, smiling warmly, "don't be ridiculous." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the room settling around them with familiar domesticity, the ticking of the mantel clock, the faint clink of Albert preparing the tea tray, the glow of late afternoon sun casting golden rectangles across the carpet. Tuppence sighed contentedly. "I suppose life may finally be calm again." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "We say that after every case." "Yes," she admitted. "And it is never true." Tommy chuckled. "Still, no more writing cases, no more mysterious keys, no more crimson scarves." "I shall be sensible," Tuppence announced grandly. "I shall buy only vases, or hats, or completely harmless household items." Tommy grinned. "You? Sensible? That'll be the day." She swatted his arm with a cushion. He grabbed it, laughing, and for a moment the seriousness of the past week melted away. A gentle clunk echoed from the front hall. Tuppence paused. "Was that—" Tommy frowned. "It sounded like—" Both rose simultaneously and stepped toward the door. On the hallway floor lay an envelope. Plain, cream, unmarked. It had been slipped discreetly through the letterbox. Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. "We weren't expecting anything, were we?" "No," Tommy said. "Not unless Marston has decided to hate us by correspondence." Tuppence bent and picked up the envelope. It was sealed, heavily. She held it up to the light. No markings, no return address, no handwriting, nothing but a faint, unfamiliar scent, something like old cedar and typewriter ink. "Well," Tuppence murmured, heart lifting with familiar anticipation, "this looks promising." Tommy exhaled in theatrical despair. "Tuppence, we just finished one adventure." "Yes," she said brightly, "but this one delivered itself." Albert poked his head from the kitchen. "Madam, sir, the tea—" He stopped short. His eyes narrowed at the envelope. "Oh no," Albert said. "Absolutely not. Tell it to go away." Tuppence grinned at him. "Albert, letters cannot obey verbal commands." "They should," Albert muttered. Tommy placed a hand gently over hers. "Shall we?" Tuppence smiled, that unmistakable, irresistible smile that had led them through countless dangers and revelations. "Oh yes," she whispered. "Let's." And together, standing in their own hallway with the promise of a new adventure in hand, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford opened the anonymous envelope, ensuring their mystery-solving days were far from over.